The captured men, women, and children were sold as a lot, so no separate deal was struck for Aisha, who was just part of the crowd of hungry and scared prisoners. Her head had been shaved, and she was covered in rags. She was just another filthy, soon-to-be slave, almost unnoticed among her fellow captives. Almost, but not quite. The moment Aisha was shoved on board the ship and into the women's section of the hold, Sebastian Curry followed her with covetous eyes. Sebastian was the first mate, second only to Captain Roberts, and sharing many of the captain's duties, plus having many others of his own. His most important task, however, was the management of the human cargo.
Welcome, everyone, to Season 2 of our summer interview series. I am Sarah Edmonds. I'm the editor-in-chief of For Page and Screen magazine. I'm here today with Matias Travieso-Diaz, the author of A Trip to Barbados. We have the pleasure of publishing his story in issue 5, which is our most recent issue. You can check it out now. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
You're very welcome.
I'm really excited to talk about this piece. We don't get very many historical fiction submissions. I love historical fiction, so I was very excited to read it. Just to start out, I'd love to hear about your inspiration for the story.
First of all, I share your love for historical fiction. I have written probably 10 to 12 historical pieces, all of which have been published. They fall into two categories. One is the alternate history. What if? What if the Spanish Armada had conquered England? What if the President Woodrow Wilson had agreed to a compromise that allowed the U.S. to become part of the League of Nations, thus avoiding the Second World War? Things like that. Alternate history is one type. The other is just plain historically based writings like The Trip to Barbados. I wrote The Trip to Barbados because I've always been interested in a sort of perverse way on the slave trade and those 200 years of horrible history in which human beings were just kidnapped and captured and brought under inhumane conditions to the New World to sell as slaves. And I was determined to write a history in which all this happened but had a happy ending, which is, and I think I achieved that in this particular piece.
Yeah, I think you did, for sure. With those stories, with such tragic stories and taking such tragic history, having a happy ending is kind of really difficult to achieve. And one thing, not to spoil it for our listeners who have not read it yet, but I think some sort of retribution and righteous anger is really integral to that happy ending. And I do think you have that here.
Yes, it's not entirely happening. There's death and many other things. But it is an ending that the person who has been sold as a slave would like to see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, when you're thinking of stories, you mentioned having kind of two approaches, historical fiction, the plain historical fiction and the alternative history. When you first come up with an idea, how do you decide what route you're going to go? Or is that just part of the idea?
Well, you have to understand that I'm a very eclectic writer. Historical fiction is only a small part of the other things that I write. I write fantasy, horror, science fiction, and so on. It is a small but to me important part. And the hardest thing when I decided to take a historical topic is to figure out how much research is it going to take and what I am aiming at. To give you an example, I'm in the middle of writing what I think is going to turn out to be a very good story about the 30-year war in Germany in the 1600s. It requires an incredible amount of research to try to get the facts right and to make a story that is not quite exactly right because it's alternate, it's not what happened. But the aim is to come up with a story that can justify the conclusion that Germany could have become a united country back in the 1600s, averting all the things that happened after that, including the rise of Napoleon in France and so on. So that's the kind of thing that interests me. And depending on what you're writing about, it can take very little or very much. Always some research has to be done, but there has to be certain amount of digging into it to make it a credible story. So that's how I go about it. In the case of Trip to Barbados, it wasn't hard. I mean, to conceptualize what I wanted to do because I went into it with that idea in mind. But again, I had to understand how the poor people who became slaves were captured, where they saw from, by whom, how they were transported, and the horrible things that happened on the trip, and what the ultimate destination was, and all that required a amount of research. So that's what I had to do. I had to immerse myself in the subject a little bit before I could even really think that I could do a credible job of writing a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you've done a great job of it with the trip to Barbados, getting that research in there while still letting the story shine. Because I know, just in my own experience, attempting to write historical fiction, it can be hard because you find out all of these interesting facts and you want to showcase all of them. But sometimes that can bog down the plot. This story was not bogged down at all, in my opinion. I think the plot really shines, but having those historical facts and elements really help it shine.
Let me jump at something that we're going to talk about later, I'm sure, which is about how I write.
Mm-hmm.
One of the greatest virtues and the biggest defect of my writing is the fact that coming from a legal profession, I try to be concise and precise and factual. So my stories could turn out to feel cold to some people, but when I'm finished with them, I feel comfortable that what's written there is accurate, basically, and it is presented in a way that is understandable. So that's what one of my goals.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I actually, personally, I've done some legal writing in the past as well, specifically working for immigration advocacy law firms. And it's a completely different style of like it's just a different beast trying to write with all of the legal jargon. And I did not study law. So I do not have that full background that you have, of course. But I'm curious, coming from a legal background, engineering law, right? Correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. Coming from,
Engineering first, law afterwards. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm just curious, like coming from that and going to creative writing, was it difficult for you to kind of make that transition into more creative works or not?
Well, it was, as I said, the hardest thing for me to do then and now is to make sure that A, I know what I'm going to try to write about, and then second, present it the way I would write a brief. In other words, something that is concise, persuasive, clear, and that has downside. I cannot write stream of consciousness. I cannot write incoherent prose. Some people do very well at that, and great masterpieces are written that way, but that's not me. I cannot do it that way. So tailoring my writing as a lawyer into my writing as a fiction writer wasn't that hard technically because my mind was already used to that kind of style. It was only conceptually because I had to create a different universe to think about. Thinking fiction is very different than thinking about your latest probability list.
Yeah, I imagine those would be a bit different. Um, Absolutely. I do think that, well, obviously, I think you've made that transition very well, at least in a trip to Barbados. And many, many other people think so as well, because you have been published an insane amount. You have, I believe, over 130 publications. Is that
Yes,
correct?
I have between short stories and essays, I have as of today 130.
Mhm.
Okay,
That's
that's
amazing.
Well, I think the thing that is most striking about that, and surprised myself, is I began writing at age 74,
Okay.
only 7 years ago. So I have done a large amount of writing in a relatively short period of time.
Mhm.
I don't know how I did it, quite frankly. And I think part of the reason is that because of my method of doing it, once I get an idea, I can seize on it and go after it. And some stories I can get it written in half a day.
Mhm.
Some like the one that I'm writing about the 30-year war in Germany has taken me days on days. So, but the concept is the same.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm curious. You've kind of answered this with that response, but I was going to ask, how do you find time for writing that much, especially because you're also working on a novel as well, correct?
Well, that is what something has to give, quite
Yeah.
frankly. Uh, I'll share you a little secret. I enjoy writing short stories because once I get the idea, I write it and get it done in a day or two, typically a day or two, and it's out.
Mhm.
Writing a novel requires the same amount of research, except far more, and it is a far more difficult process. I've written two and a quarter novels, and the quarter that I'm not finished writing is being put aside because I get these ideas about writing short stories. That you I rather go through with a 6 hour effort than trying to. And let me give you an example. It took me one day, 2 days to figure out how the women dressed for parties in Cuba in the early 1800s. Okay? Took me 2 days to figure out what they wore and how they got it. That I could have written several short stories in that time, and it was just a paragraph in a novel. So it's different universe.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. And do you find that you prefer short stories over the longer form?
Uh, it's not a question of preference. Actually, it is the preference only in the sense that I like to get things done.
Mhm.
And when I began writing a short story, except for difficult ones like the one I'm writing now, I can get it, polish it in a day or two.
Mhm.
The last one that I got published, I wrote it in half a day. Okay,
Mhm.
uh, so that is a sense of accomplishment that I've got this idea, I put it in writing, I wrote it, and I send it out, and it will get accepted or not, but it's out. In novel, you have to really keep them thinking. The sources right. I am telling a sufficiently compelling story, but is it accurate? Is it going to write about the 1800s or 1700s? Are you Do you have enough to go on? So it is. I prefer writing short stories only because of the experience.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. Now, with you have such a quick turnaround for your short stories, how do you, this is going to sound silly, how do you decide when they're done? Because I know a lot of writers, myself included sometimes, can get caught up in obsessing. Is this correct? Is this good enough? Is this right? And just rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. And I think that hinders people a lot of times. So I'm curious, how do you decide after you've written it, revised it, possibly gotten beta readers, how do you decide when it's done and ready to be submitted?
Well, I'll tell you mechanically, and then I'll tell you intellectually. Mechanically, I usually got like 3 or 4 drafts of the story. Each draft trying to clean up, take out inconsistencies, misspell words, things that don't killing adverbs. That's one of my favorite pastimes in the word, killing unnecessary adverbs, things of that sort. But intellectually, you have to feel like it is, you have provided a complete story that has a satisfying ending. Giving the person, after they spend whatever time reading it, don't feel cheated by giving you something like, well, that's silly. And so I feel like I'm accomplished writing and finishing a story when I am completely satisfied with the beginning to the end. And the end is for the most important part. So that's how I get there. Uh, some people when they read it say, "Well, this is not right." And so some of the people who read my stories before I send them out, they say, "I don't like the ending. That's not right." or that's not the way I like it, or why do you do that? And then I have to think about it. Is this what I was trying to do? I don't know. Most of the times it isn't.
Mm. Yeah, I feel like sometimes the most satisfying ending is the one that leaves the reader frustrated because that means you made them feel something. That means you made them invested. So sometimes that can be a great reaction to get. Mhm.
Well, I mean, okay. Let me tell you about probably my favorite short story, and I have to give you a circumstance. I lost my wife a year and a half ago. When she died, the day she died, I was in the middle of finishing a short story. It was an animal tale, which I love writing animal tales about a family of foxes. Okay, and I had to change the ending completely because of my wife's death. And it is about this fox couple. Foxes mate for life. So when one spouse died, the other gets left, you know, alone. And in this story of mine, as I was writing, my wife died, and I had to change it so that the female of the pair died. And I had to figure out what to do with the poor male fox. It turned out to be, as I said, my favorite for purely personal reasons. But that's when you think that you have written something that you find it is satisfying to you. I mean, it may satisfying to the public or not, but it's satisfying to you.
That sounds like a beautiful story. Thank you for telling
Well,
me.
you like it, I'll send you a copy. I mean, and, by the way, many of these stories, I have a website, very rudimentary, but I
Mhm,
put copies of the ones that are published that are no longer in terms of doing harm to the publisher. Like the Tito Barbados, I'll put it up someday. Uh, After now that we start, I may put it up soon. Not to compete with you, but it's just to make it available.
mhm,
And that story has been on my website now for for 2 years, almost 2 years now.
mhm.
So that's how I feel like a story is done. When I get to the point of saying something that at the end I'm happy that I wrote.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're more than welcome to put a trip to Barbados up on your website. I don't believe we have any like period of exclusivity with our issues. So you're more than welcome to. I will
Well,
tell.
I'm very careful. I'm very careful before I put something on the website that there is no such a thing as like one of my earlier historical fiction
Mhm.
that takes place uh, also during the 30-year war, but it's a completely different story. The publisher had a 5 year exclusivity period, so that we're not going to, well, we're not 5 years yet. So that's not going to get to my site until then.
Mhm. That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, and we appreciate it too, as far as like publishers and as well. But we definitely want to promote you as well. So I will actually, when this interview goes up, I will link your website so that anyone who watches it can also go to your website and find the stories that are up that you're talking about, too. So I'll make sure that's up. Um, so I'm curious, you talked about how eclectic your writing is. You do all of these different things from all of these different genres. Are there any themes that you find are consistent or any kind of imagery
Well,
choices? Mhm,
I wish I had thought of this before. It just came to mind half an hour ago. The most recently consistent theme in my story, it ties back to my story of the Foxes, is the enduring nature of love. Uh, Second or most favorite story that I wrote more recently is called Born on a Wednesday. It's a retelling of the story of the famous uh, uh, Greek uh, the famous Greek oh God, I'm having a mental block. I'll get back to it in a second. and uh, Orpheus and Eurydice. It is a retelling of the tales of Orpheus and Eurydice. And after I wrote it, which I think is a pretty good story on its own, but I'm saying, why did I write it? And I had to change the ending 4 times until I got it right. It is at the end of the story, and not to give it away, but at the end of the story, Orpheus is having a conversation with the priest that married them, the Greek, and he is he's complaining about his grief. His grief is unending. He drives the universe crazy because with the music that he makes, and he cries with tears, and the seas cry, and in fact Shakespeare wrote a sonnet about it. Anyhow, and the priest tells you, you need to do this change what you're doing. You need to write not about your grief, about your love and its enduring nature. And then Orpheus went on to write more beautiful songs, but that had an uplifting theme at the end. So that's what my story turned out to be. So I have written in the last couple of years, without realizing it, and just came to me today, about 7 or 8 stories which are linked in that the theme that drives them is present the concept that love is enduring. It takes you beyond the grave, if it's true. So that's all. That's one of the recurring things. But I don't usually have recurring things. They are just clusters of things that have come to me over time, and they are not necessarily linked thematically, but in consequence, if you read them as a whole, you find that there are similarities. They always exist. Although I try never to repeat myself, I don't write the same story twice. But still, there are similarities among things. And this is one. I mean, I've been writing the stories on the theme of the enduring nature of love now for a year and a half. And I actually see some of my best work, but not necessarily because I intended to be that way.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, did you have these stories that are kind of more thematically linked than usual? Would you ever consider trying to publish them as an anthology or a collection?
Well, look, this is funny you were saying. I have one anthology already published.
Mhm.
This, and I'll give you the title you want. Um, it is you can find it in Amazon. This is an anthology. It was directed by the publisher who specializes in horror stories. So all these stories have a horror element to it. Very significant or little attenuated, but they are horror stories. Now I'm working on getting, negotiating to get published a collection of fantasy stories this year, and another that has been promised, but it won't happen until next year. So I have enough written stuff to publish 6 or 7 anthologies thematically. I can have a science fiction anthology. I have uh, easily 2 fantasy stories, sure, collections of short stories, and so on. I mean, it is no end to the variety you can have. If you are lucky enough that the ideas come to you, that's all that it takes. So yes, and in fact, one anthology that I could write, and I have already thought about it, is an anthology of love stories, not traditional love stories, but
Mm.
the stories involving love. And these 2 that I mentioned to you earlier on would be in that collection. Okay,
Mhm.
and something will be humorous. I mean, I have a different take on how Romeo and Juliet got married, and that one has happy ending. Okay,
Mhm.
uh, but so yes, in fact, I do have things that are thematically linked. One, not romance, not romance. I have not written any romance as such. Although one story or 2 could be cataloged by tension to romance category. But stories that deal with love in this aspect in many different ways. So
Yeah,
I will someday maybe, if I live long enough, try to get published an anthology of love, love story or love related story.
absolutely. I think you should go for it just because I want to read it. I'm saying that selfishly. So,
Well, I mean, I could cite you to some of the stories that will be on an anthology that are already published and they're on my website. That you could do if you want to have a foretaste of what it was going to be like. But like my story of Office and Irradiation is there. You want to read it, you can just pick it up and so on.
mhm. Yeah, I definitely will. Trust me. I will be going there to read the stories after this. Uh,
Okay.
absolutely. Um, So I know you've talked a bit about things that you're working on, the 30 Years War story and the other novel. Um, is there anything that you have kind of in the wings waiting for publication that you want to promote to our listeners?
Well, I think that the thing that I have published is that anthology that is available on Amazon.
Mhm,
It's called The Satchel and other terrors. It has been out for over a year. The people who have read it have liked it very much. But so that's available. The other ones are in the offing, but they are not. I cannot publicize them yet because they are not out yet.
mhm. That's fair. Um, okay, okay, great. Well, once they are out, if you send us the links, I can share them and advertise them through our magazine because we like doing that. No one ever sends us links of published work. I tell them to, they don't do it.
Well, I will send you the link to this particular collection because it's out. I can give you the Amazon number, but I could give you links to the specific stories one by one. But I don't know that how helpful that will be.
No worries, no worries. I think just mean when our contributors publish things in the future, we like to share them, but sometimes we don't know until way after the fact. So once the stories you have waiting that aren't out yet come out, you can totally send them to us. We'll share them, share the posts, share the other websites. We're more than happy to do
Well,
that.
I have about 20 stories that have not been accepted for publication by anyone. If you'd like to see any of that, I can send it to you.
But you can always send them to us. We can always consider them.
It is a difficult thing because doing promotion, trying to get individual stories published is time consuming. I
Mm,
have to do a lot of that because I'll never be able to get a collection that is worth of its name published if I don't say these stories have been good, deemed to be good enough to be published by somebody before. Okay, I
mm,
don't have that many stories that I include in my collections that have not been published already.
mm,
Okay, uh, I don't use the collection as a vehicle for trying to get published work that wouldn't get published otherwise. It's the other way around.
mm,
But yes, I'm not saying I might send you something. I have one or two that might be suitable for you.
mm.
But I wasn't trying I wasn't trying to do that. But yeah,
No worries, no worries. That's what talking does. Opens doors. But absolutely. So is there anything specifically that you would like to talk about that like I haven't touched on?
and I think that it might be of some marginal use if I tell you two things that could be of interest to people. First,
Mhm.
my method, if
Yeah.
there's such a thing as a method. And second, advice that I can give to people who are in the process of writing.
Yes. I always
Uh,
ask the advice question last. But
yeah, well, let me tell you first about my method.
Mhm.
As I said, the ideas for my story just come to me at random. Sometimes the first story that I ever wrote back in 2017 came in a dream. And I woke up and say, where did I get this idea? And it was interesting enough that I ended up writing it and it turned out to be a very good story. I got published. But that is one source. Another source is that things that I read apparently that are genocide. There was once I read a, a pseudo scientific story about people doing research trying to locate the cycle of a human soul. Okay, and I wrote a story of that because it's a very fascinating story. And assuming that in fact they found where the cycle was and what are you going to do when you found where the soul is? Okay, so uh, that's because my ideas come like that. Usually I'm halfway there because I already know what the story is going to be about. If I don't have the idea of what the story is going to be about, it's much harder to write the story. But once I know what I want to write about, it's just mechanical almost because I have enough experience writing that I can just spend the time. And then you have to figure out how to present it, what works and what doesn't work, and so on. So that is how it comes to me and how I do it. Now, the mechanical process of writing is something different. It's mechanical. You first of all try to write it once, read it and see if it makes sense. Then you start polishing it. And by polishing, I don't mean necessarily try to be precious about using arcane language. Polishing in the sense of getting rid of things that are not necessary to convey the story and trying to take out. I made myself the following idea. If I had to pay 50 cents for this word, would I do it? If I had to pay $5 for this word, would I be willing to pay for it? And after I go through that, I try to prune it. And the result is, again, some people accuse me of being too cold or too whatever. But to me, getting a story written and getting it clean of all the feedback is important. Just in itself is an important end. So that's what I recommend that people that start writing a story is really critically and think to where each word has a place and it is. Then you will come to the question is it the best word? But that's a different story. But once you have a word, is it something word that I want to include, needs to be included? And it is very hard. I mean, people are very reluctant, including myself, to part with things that your grandchildren. You don't want to kill them off. So you have to get rid of them because they're sometimes that's another problem of mine. Because I'm a lawyer, I'm always trying to persuade. So I do give the fact that will persuade the reader of the court that this is the way it should go. But then you can go too far in doing that. I mean, you can't put unnecessary detail. You have to figure out it is something that necessarily has to be part of the story. So that's the first thing that I recommend to a person writing is look at it critically and don't get enamored of what you have written. Figure out if this is something that is needed and it is serving the purpose. Number one. Number two is do be very careful with your language in two respects. First, use the right adjectives, but not too many of them. And as I say, kill adverbs if you can. Adverbs are a very cheap way of trying to do something. Most of the time, it doesn't work and takes away. That doesn't mean that you cannot use them, but I'm saying you have to be very, very parsimonious in doing it. And third, you have to give a story to at least two or three people to read, not only because they will correct mistakes and say, I don't like the ending and so on, but also because you have to put some distance between yourself and the thing you're writing. So that the outcome out with is something that objectively as good as it can be, as opposed to satisfying your curiosity or your ego. As to, I wrote this, look. So those are things that I recommend to people. And most important, send it out to everybody that will take it, and doesn't it to anybody who doesn't take simultaneous submissions. I have such an enemy of that concept, thinking that I send this story to you and I'm going to sit on it for 4 months and you cannot send it to anybody else and then I'm going to reject. I mean, there is no marketplace situation that works that way. None. So, so I try to send it to as many people And the consequence of that is that you're going to get many rejections. Okay? I have the list of rejections for my stories is 40 pages now. Okay? And, it is very low batting average if you think that you can to get 130 story written and you have to have 40 pages of rejection. But that's the way it goes. I mean, stories get rejected for many reasons. And not all the reasons are reasonable. They are rejected because the editor thinks that people won't like it, or I don't like it, the prerogative, or it doesn't fit with the other things I'm trying to say, or I have this put decide between these two, and this guy is better known than this other guy, so I'm going to go with the one that give me more bonus. And then so many reasons stories get rejected, not necessarily on the main. Plus, the main one is a lousy story, so it's not going to get rejected, not going to get accepted. But you have to write your story and be prepared to get rejection letters. And some of the rejection letters are kind, some of them are informative, but there are very few that tell you why are rejecting it. It's time consuming. And some of them are just in the crack. But you collect them because every rejection that you get is a sign that you tried and it didn't work. But there's always another day. So those are my main uh, general recommendations to writers and persevere. Persevere because uh, it takes a lot of stumbling just to get your work done and to get something that you're happy with, and then find others who are happy with it as well.
I love that. That's such good advice. That's fantastic advice. Um, Especially about rejection. Rejections are hard and they add up. But like you said,
Oh, some rejections can be heartbreaking. It happened to me last night. I
oh,
had this story that I still haven't been able to face. But this publisher, which is a very good publisher, sat on it for 75 days. They put me and they sent me 9 rejection letters saying, you made it to the final, but now decide we cannot have you. It breaks my heart two ways, because I thought it was a good story, but also because I had high hopes when this publisher, which is a very reputable one, had been working on this story for 75 days. I mean, that's a good sign. But it's heartbreaking when it doesn't work out. But you have to take them as come.
mhm. Absolutely. That's such a shame. I actually just got a rejection email a couple of hours ago. So I understand the feeling. It was a similar thing where they said they loved it, but it wasn't for their audience. And I'm like, I get it. I get it. It
Yeah,
happened.
yeah, yeah. As I said, it's a business, and the publisher has to take many things into consideration when they look at your work.
Mhm.
Not necessarily the merits. Okay, I have been told several times, I like your story very much. I cannot publish it because it doesn't fit with what we're trying to do in this particular volume. Sometimes they have a theme that they want to sort of pursue, or it is not for my audience, for our audience. Many reasons. But as I said, writer, if you want to enjoy yourself at the end and enjoy yourself as you're doing it, you have to pay the price of it. And
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, well, I feel like that advice feels like a good place for us to wrap this up, if that's okay with you, if there's anything.
anytime, yeah, sure.
Okay. I've absolutely loved speaking with you. It's been great getting to hear about your experiences, your advice. I love all of your advice. It's very useful. And thank you again just for taking the time to talk with me today and being part of this interview
Not a
series.
problem. Okay. All right. It was great talking to you.